The Navy's heavy-duty C-130 transport plane banked hard over the Virginia coastline, its 4 turboprop engines droning a familiar, monotonous hum that had lulled generations of troops into an uneasy sleep. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. 24 men from SEAL Team 4 sat in webbed jump seats, their bodies encased in bulky tactical gear, faces painted in streaks of green and brown. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and a sharp odor of concentrated adrenaline. These were the tip of the American spear, and they were en route to a hot landing zone in Eastern Europe, a place the public only knew as a region of interest, but the intelligence community knew as a tinderbox. Among these warriors sat Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Ironhead Thompson. A 15-year veteran with the cold, gray eyes of a man who had seen too much, Thompson was the embodiment of the quiet professional. But he was running through the mission parameters for the 100th time in his head, his gaze fixed on the canvas duffel bag at his feet. Inside was enough firepower to start a small war. He didn't look at the newest member of the squadron, the one they had been forced to bring along. The civilian. Her name was Lena. She was listed on the manifest as a linguistic and cultural advisor, a tag that made the hardened SEALs snicker. To them, she was a problem. She was a woman in her early 30s with sharp cheekbones and intelligent, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything and reveal nothing. She wore no body armor, carried no weapon, and sat apart from the men, clutching a small, worn leather satchel as if it were a lifeline. To the SEALs, she was a liability, a piece of baggage that needed babysitting in the most hostile environment imaginable. Thompson had argued vehemently against her inclusion. "Sir, with all due respect," he had barked at the commanding officer, "this isn't a diplomatic mission. We don't need a librarian holding our hands. She'll freeze up. She'll get one of my men killed." The CO had simply slid a folder across the desk. "Your opinion is noted, Senior Chief, but Washington is insistent. The local asset we are extracting won't talk to anyone but her. They have history. She goes. Protect her with your life." Thompson had slammed the folder shut without reading it. He didn't care about her resume. He cared about the mission. Now, 30 minutes out from the drop zone, the plane lurched violently. The crew chief's voice crackled over the intercom, tense and clipped. "Multiple surface-to-air missile launches. We have locks. We are taking evasive action." The warning klaxon blared, a deafening screech that pierced the engine noise. The plane dove sharply, men and equipment straining against the restraints. Thompson's training kicked in. He checked his team, on their faces grim but steady. Then his eyes flickered to Lena. She was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped her satchel, but she wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were closed and her lips were moving silently, as if in prayer or perhaps focus. Another violent shudder rocked the airframe, followed by a deafening thump. A missile had detonated close by, shredding the hydraulics in the tail section. The plane went into an uncontrollable spin. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" the crew chief screamed. The last thing Thompson saw was the interior of the plane twisting into a vortex of loose gear and debris before the world went black. Thompson regained consciousness to the sound of hissing steam and crackling flames. He was suspended upside down, held by his safety harness. The world was a surreal, nightmarish landscape of twisted metal and acrid smoke. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, drowning out all other sound. He blinked, trying to clear the blood from his eyes that was pooling in his forehead due to the inversion. He saw his men. Some were moving, groaning, trying to undo their harnesses. Others were horrifyingly still. The plane had sheared in half on impact, coming to rest in a dense, snow-dusted forest. He fumbled for his knife, cut himself free, and dropped heavily onto the crumpled ceiling of the plane. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed the pain away. "Sound off!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. That one by one the survivors called out names. They were battered, cut, and dazed, but alive. Of the 24, 12 had answered. The others were either dead or trapped in the mangled forward section of the aircraft. Then he remembered. The civilian. He scanned the wreckage. He saw her near a gaping tear in the fuselage. She had been thrown clear of her seat and was lying in a heap on the forest floor, partially covered in snow. She wasn't moving. "Doc! Get to the civvy," he ordered one of his corpsmen. The medic, a burly man named Santoro, stumbled over to her, his movements shaky. He knelt down, checked her pulse, and looked back at Thompson with a grim expression. He gave a subtle shake of his head. No pulse. Thompson felt a surge of cold fury, a waste, a completely preventable loss of life. But just as Santoro started to turn away, a weak hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Lena's eyes flew open. And they weren't the eyes of a terrified civilian. They were clear, focused, and burning with an intensity that made Santoro flinch. "No pulse in the wrist," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper but unnervingly calm. "It's shattered. Check the carotid." Santoro, a trained combat medic who had saved countless lives, just stared at her for a second, stunned by the authoritative command in her voice. He instinctively obeyed, his fingers pressing against her neck. He felt a strong, steady beat. Then his eyes went wide. "Senior Chief, she's got a pulse. Strong." Lena pushed herself up onto her elbows, wincing. She looked at the wreckage, at the men lying in the snow, at the distant sound of small arms fire that was beginning to echo through the woods. "The missile battery that hit you is about 3 clicks that way," she said, pointing into the dark tree line, her voice steady as a surgeon's. "They are conventional military, not militia. They will send a patrol to confirm the kill and capture survivors. You have less than 20 minutes. Thompson stared at her, his world tilting on its axis. How did she know that? He opened his mouth to speak, but she was already moving. She crawled over to her satchel, which had landed nearby. She unzipped it. Inside, nestled amongst language dictionaries and notebooks, were compact, sterile packages of advanced medical supplies that were not standard issue for civilians. She pulled out a battlefield trauma kit. "Senior Chief, get your men out of the plane," she ordered, her voice brooking no argument. "I need a full casualty count, now." The sheer force of her personality was like a physical blow. Before he knew it, Thompson was relaying her orders to his men, organizing them to pull the wounded from the wreckage. He watched, dumbfounded, as she moved to the most critically injured SEAL, that a young man named Murphy, whose leg was pinned under a heavy piece of machinery. His femoral artery was severed, and blood was pumping out onto the snow in a horrifying, rhythmic spray. Santoro was standing over him, his hands shaking as he tried to apply a tourniquet above the wound, but the angle was impossible due to the wreckage pinning the leg. "I can't get above it. I can't stop the bleed," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Lena pushed him aside. She didn't reach for a tourniquet. And instead, she plunged her bare fingers directly into the wound, feeling past the torn flesh and muscle. The SEALs around her recoiled. Thompson felt his stomach lurch. It was a gruesome, impossible sight. She was feeling for the artery. "There," she murmured, her face a mask of intense concentration. With a practiced, precise motion, she pinched the severed end of the femoral artery between her fingers, cutting off the flow of blood from the heart. The geyser stopped instantly. "Get this wreckage off him," she commanded calmly, her hand buried deep inside the young man's leg. "I have the bleed. You have 60 seconds before my hand cramps and I lose it. Move." The SEALs, the most elite warriors on the planet, moved like they were possessed. They leveraged the machinery, using their combined strength and a bent steel rod as a pry bar. They lifted the weight just enough for Santoro to slide a proper tourniquet high on Murphy's thigh and cinch it down tight. "Clear!" Santoro yelled. Lena slowly, carefully, withdrew her bloody hand. She looked at Santoro. "He'll live. Prep him for transport. Next." For the next 10 minutes, Thompson and his men were spectators to a miracle. Lena moved among the wounded with a speed and efficiency that was almost supernatural. She stabilized a sucking chest wound by ripping the sterile packaging from a dressing and using the plastic wrapper as an occlusive seal when the proper one wasn't immediately at hand. She realigned a dislocated shoulder with a single swift movement. She diagnosed a tension pneumothorax in a seal who was turning blue, and without hesitating, she grabbed a large-bore IV catheter from her bag and calmly instructed Santoro on where to insert it into the chest wall to release the trapped air. "There," she said, as the man's breathing eased. "Needle decompression. You learned that in your A school, Santoro. Don't let the shock freeze you. Your brain is your primary weapon." Every move she made was precise, confident, and born of years of practice. This wasn't a linguist. This was a master trauma surgeon, and more than that, this was a combat veteran. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She worked with the detached, hyper-focused calm of someone who had done this hundreds of times before, in environments far worse than this. The sound of the pursuing patrol was getting closer, or shouted orders in a foreign tongue could be heard through the trees. Thompson knew they had to move, but they had 6 walking wounded and 3 critical, including Murphy. They couldn't outrun a trained patrol. "Senior Chief," Lena said, wiping her hands on the snow. "Give me your radio." He handed it over without question. She keyed the mic and spoke in a language Thompson didn't recognize. It wasn't the local dialect. It was guttural, harsh, and completely foreign. She listened for a response, her head cocked. It came through the static, a burst of the same strange language. She turned off the radio and handed it back. "The patrol has been called back to base. There is a NATO fast rope team being inserted on the other side of the ridge. They think you are the diversion. We have about 45 minutes before they realize their mistake. We need to be gone by then." "How did you do that?" Thompson whispered, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Lena looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something old and sad in her eyes. "I told their commander his wife went into early labor, and his mother-in-law is demanding he come to the hospital. Family is everything in this culture. He'll check his phone, see it's a blocked number, and spend the next 20 minutes trying to call home. It's enough." Thompson just stared. The pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed slowly clicking into place. This woman wasn't just a doctor. The language she spoke was Chechen. The authority in her voice was that of a commander. The knowledge of enemy protocols and psychology was that of an intelligence officer who had spent years in the field. He remembered the file he had refused to read. Who the hell are you?" he asked. Lena looked at the wreckage, at the men she had just saved, and then back at Thompson. And she gave him a small, tired smile. "My name is Lena Volkov. I'm a doctor. I'm a linguist. And for 6 years I was the lead surgical consultant for a UN task force working alongside Russian Spetsnaz in Chechnya and Georgia. I've operated in bombed-out hospitals, in caves, and under fire. I've trained their medics. I've briefed their generals. I am here because the man we are extracting is a former Chechen intelligence officer who saved my life in a field hospital in Grozny. He saved me. And now I'm here to save him. And it seems a few of your men too." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the soft moan of the wind and the crackling of the dying fire from the wreckage. Every SEAL who could stand was staring at her. The civilian, the liability, the librarian had just performed battlefield trauma care that surpassed their own legendary medic. She had spoken to the enemy in their own tongue and manipulated their commander with psychological warfare tactics that would have made a CIA operative proud. She was bruised, covered in the blood of their brothers and standing in the snow like a ghost of wars past. Thompson looked at his men. He looked at the stabilized wounded who would live to fight another day because of her. He then walked over to a duffel that had been thrown from the wreckage, unzipped it, and then pulled out a compact M4 carbine. He walked back to Lena and held it out to her. She looked at the weapon, then up at him. She didn't smile. She simply took it, checked the chamber with a fluid, practiced movement, and slung it over her shoulder. It was the gesture of a professional. "All right, Doc," Thompson said, his voice thick with a respect he had never offered anyone outside of his team. "You heard the lady. We have 40 minutes to move out. Let's not waste her time. Let's move." As the SEALs formed up, their perception of the world fundamentally altered. They moved as one unit into the dark forest. The woman they were assigned to protect was now leading them, a silent, lethal guardian who had emerged, bruised yet unbowed from the flames.